name is Christine. Welcome to my podcast, Unmuzzled at 67. We're here now on Series 3. Today is Episode 6. It's called Deep Dive. Thanks for your company and thanks for choosing my podcast today. So, in the usual way, let me do a quick recap for you on what I was talking about last week. So I was talking about my own experience with therapy and counselling and talking about some of the daily habits that I strive to do. I need to emphasise that because some days it just doesn't happen, but that is my plan, to get all of these daily habits done as much as I can. I also wanted to have a quick mention about the affirmations that I do as well, just in case you haven't come across that before. I thought I would give you a brief idea of why I do them and what the benefits are. So when I was researching how to change your mindset and rewire your brain, which is really what I felt that I had to do, I came across this explanation of affirmations. Positive affirmations help you disrupt negative thinking habits and build a new route in your brain for positive thoughts. Now that's quite profound, isn't it? And eventually those positive thought patterns appear and your good thoughts affect your actions, which I think we all know. This can help you learn new skills, succeed at work, or improve relationships. And it's definitely made a mental difference to me. But like all new habits, you need to persist to experience the results. For example, if you couldn't expect to see great results if you only went to the gym 4 or 5 times. You couldn't expect to see great results in your body shape. You need to persist to see the results. And it's the same persistence that you need to retrain your thoughts and your actions. I was talking about my own challenges with this, trying to change thinking and behaviours that I've had for 40 years, ingrained into my DNA almost. And sometimes I definitely do lose the battle and the old me appears and it rears its head. So I ask myself, what triggers me? And I've come to the conclusion that it's bumping into people from my past, especially if it's I don't know I'm going to bump into them. I immediately just go back to my old default behaviour. I revert back to the version of me that they recognise and that I am most comfortable with being with them. It happens in the blink of an eye. I find it really unsettling and upsetting. And what do? I just have to get back on the horse and keep going. I don't overthink it. I don't overanalyze it. I just remind myself that I'm just a human being and I'm doing my best. I maybe start doing my affirmations maybe 3 times a day instead of 2, maybe increase the length of my meditation to 30 minutes, 35 minutes, just to get me back on track. It's the same as if we're trying to lose weight and you're doing quite well and then one night you have a wee drink. And that might lead to a takeaway. But it's not the end of the world. You just need to get back on it. When I look back now at what I started to do to help myself get better, it's partly because I needed to do something. I needed to take action because I just couldn't go on living like that anymore. I was done with that life. And as I've said before, I didn't discover any new process. I just listened to what successful people were doing. And I took their advice and I read books of people that had overcome similar situations to myself and they did this and other ones did that. And so I just looked and I also researched how to rewire your brain and a lot of stuff came up with that as well. So all I did was I put all that stuff on a list. I just started doing it. And I was sure I needed a therapist or maybe a psychiatrist, it might be more the word. But I didn't have the money for that. And I just thought, well, what can I do for myself so that I'm doing something? And that's what I did. And it worked for me. I was also talking about my default response to life last week. Well, for most of my adult life, which consisted of basically 3 phrases. Fuck it. Fuck them. Her or him. And who cares? I'm glad to tell you that these days I have a new voice in my head, a new default, which is the gatekeeper for all the negative thoughts or emotions. So when I experience a negative thought, this new voice jumps in instantly and says, no negative thoughts allowed in this head. So that's a kind of default now. That is just the wee kind of thing that it plays now. And I love it. I trained myself to make changes like this, and it's so worth it. It is literally life-changing. But please don't think it's all done with me saying that, because this is a lifelong game. Changing yourself, keeping on top of it. You're never finished. You're constantly working at it. So anyway, let's get going with today's topic. Today's topic is the inner child. So if you're sitting comfortably, then I'll begin. Last time I was sharing with you what the therapist that I saw asked me. One thing that she asked me, and she said, so what would you say to your 12-year-old self if you could speak to her now? And I answered, I see you. I've got you. I get you. And I love you unconditionally. That's what I was desperate for my parents to say to me. So that was my first proper introduction to the concept of inner child. I had come across those words, inner child, in some books, some online stuff, but I didn't know what it was, so I just ignored it. Then I bought a book called Healing Your Lost Inner Child by Robert Jackman, and this really opened my eyes and provided, which was very necessary for me, a guided process to recovery and healing. But this was the starting point for me. Have you ever asked yourself the following questions? This is from the book that I've just mentioned. Why do I keep making the same mistakes in my life? Why do I verbally attack others and then promise I won't do it again? Why do I doubt, second guess myself all the time? Why do I do so much for others and nothing for myself? Why do I self-sabotage? Why do I think I'm a loser and worthless? And why do I want to run away from this life? The answers to these questions lie deep within, so the book says. For me, I could see me in all of these questions. I had tried my whole life to answer these questions and couldn't, which led to frustration and disappointment in myself. So, what does the inner child mean? The inner child concept is from the eminent psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Carl Jung. And the idea is that you need to connect with your wounded inner child in order to gain peace of mind and in order to stop the knee-jerk reactions. Remember that if you've had to deal with trauma, emotionally you do not mature and you remain emotionally the same age when you endured the trauma. So in my case, I was an adult with a 12-year-old dealing with my emotions. And I've talked about this before in series 1. So I found the answer to my lifelong question, what is wrong with me and why can't I fix myself? And it's not that I was going about it the wrong way. I just didn't know where to start. I just thought this was about discipline. I thought this was about disciplining myself to stop these knee-jerk reactions, stop running my life at 100 miles an hour, stop this really immature side of my personality coming out. And I couldn't. So no matter how often I told myself off, and no matter how often I would cry or feel frustrated, it didn't make a difference, because the next day I would just get up and it would start all over again. I needed to follow the process of addressing and healing my wounded inner child. And the therapist suggested that I did do that too. How does it work? For me, it's a difficult, ongoing process, which starts with communicating with your wounded inner child, both talking and writing letters. So this might sound a bit weird to some, but for me, having read a lot about this, I know for me it is a real thing and very much ongoing. And it is intrinsically tied to my healing and well-being. The unhealed, wounded inner child, the root of the emotional patterns that keep showing up in our lives, if you're like me, these woundings created lifelong dysfunctional patterns in how we look at and interact with ourselves and others. It was normal for me to think of myself as stupid, that my life was pointless, the more I accepted, incorporated, and carried this projected view all the years of my adult life. Then how do I tap into my authentic self? So really, if you start to believe at quite a young age that you're worthless, you're this, you're that, in time, it just integrates into you, and that is who you become. So you become worthless because that's the way you behave. And if you feel everything is pointless, then you will go about your life being that, and that is who you now begin to be. So what this book is saying is you've actually lost touch and connection with your authentic self, which means the person you were before you started to believe these new thoughts about yourself, this new image that you have brought for yourself through your life experience. So being back in touch, or finding my authentic self, if you like, is a huge thing for me, absolutely huge, because I just consider myself to have been masking, to have been living this life that my life experience had taught me that that's who I was. And there often was a thought in my head, but I wonder who I was before this happened to me when I was 12. And I wonder, no, that's not true. What I would say to myself is, I wonder what I would have been like, what I would have been like as an adult if this had never happened to me. And although people say you shouldn't go back in the past, you can't change it, for me, it's a thought worth thinking about, because it does make you think. I mean, I've said many times on a couple of podcasts that if you have no self-esteem, you have no self-love, you have no confidence in yourself, you weren't born like that. It's not your fault, if you like. It's your life experience that has brought this into your head. It's not the way you were born. So you have to think, well, if we hadn't had such horrible life experiences, what would we have been like? And for me, it's a thought worth having. It's not a thought worth dwelling on, but it's a thought worth having. And it certainly has been a goal of mine to try to get to a point where I might discover the real me. Who was I under all this kidding on, all this masking, all this pretending, all this absolute belief that I was worth nothing? Then if I was able to work on that and heal that and fix that, I wonder who would be beneath it. So I think by working on and healing on my inner child, then I do really feel that maybe eventually I will find out who I really am. And that is going to be some fucking task, because there are so many fucking versions of me at the moment. What if I turn out to be none of those? I think that might be a good plan. So to kind of put all this together, I would say the person I was, and still am in many ways, was a made-up person. Made up by my judgments on what kind of person I was. Over time, I became that person, and I believed the judgments that I had on myself, and it became ingrained into my perception of me for many, many years. So I lost that connection with the real me, or the me that would have grown into an adult had this not happened to me. It was a negative persona created by me and my life experiences. So my life's work continues like a cross on my back to be rid of the old thinking and the old behaviour. But as always, I have a relentless pursuit to get better, to be this best version I can be of myself. And this, my friends, is the end of today's podcast. It's not a really long one because I thought it was quite depthful. I found it honestly quite difficult to explain. I guess if you're talking about these quite deep things that are only, I think, relevant if something has happened to you that makes this relevant for you. And I found it easier to read it and understand it than to try and explain on a podcast. I hope that I've managed a little bit, and I would say, because this is quite an unusual and quite a depthful episode, that if anybody wants to send me a message to find out a little bit more, or ask me any questions about this, I do actually know a little bit more than I'm saying, but I just don't want to make this a big kind of psychology lesson, because it absolutely isn't. And in many ways, I felt maybe I should just leave that out. I find it quite difficult I don't find it difficult to talk about, but I find it difficult to explain. But like all the other episodes that I was a bit unsure about, it is part of the journey. And this is part of not the journey, but the ongoing journey. Because I often just wonder, when will this journey be done? And then the answer comes right away: never. The journey will never be done. I don't think there will ever be a point where I will say, that's it, I'm fine now. I'm sorted now. I just absolutely don't think that will happen. So, if this particular episode has resonated with you and you would like to ask me anything, please don't hesitate to get in touch through Instagram. That would be brilliant. And I hope you've not found it too heavy today. But as I say, it's part of the journey. So anyway, thanks as always for your company today. It's been absolutely great to have your company, and I look forward to seeing you next week. And a wee live on Thursday night at 9 o'clock on Instagram if you're interested. Thanks for watching.